Hey there guys, so in front of me is a capture card that I am really excited to take a look at. Some of you guys might remember that I took a look at this very cheap budget capture card. Now here it claims that it does 4K Ultra HD. That is not the case. It can do 4K pass-through, but it cannot record in 4K. It can only really do up to 1080p, and it really didn't do a great job at that either. But what was great about this is that it would bypass HDCP protection. And that means that if you are trying to use a console that has HDCP protection that is hard to bypass, like the PlayStation 3, or you just have some kind of device that you want to be able to record off of, but it won't function because it has that HDCP protection that you can't turn off, this was the cheapest entry-level way to get in there. But of course, the biggest downside is that it would have screen tearing. Now, this capture card is also USB, but it claims to be able to be a far more powerful unit, being able to do 4K 60 HDR pass-through, and it can record all the way up to 1080p 240 frames per second. Now, cracking the box open and taking it out of here immediately, wow, yeah, this thing is really thin. I wasn't expecting it to be so thin. Also, I can already tell this feels a lot more premium than I was expecting it to. It is $100, but considering the fact that the AverMedia capture card that I use is more expensive than this and is all plastic, this feels like a better unit than that. Now, I see that it comes with two cables there. This is the small USB-C, so I'm guessing that this is the one that you're going to be plugging into your system. I doubt that this is going to be some kind of power cable, but by the looks of the other one in there, that does seem like a power cable, so I'm wondering if it needs that. If so, that's a little disappointing, but we'll have to see. Okay, yeah, you do need to have both of these plugged in for it to work, so that's a little disappointing there, but if it does what I want it to do, then this really is not that much of an inconvenience. Okay, let me put together a little setup here so that we can test out the capture on this thing. All right, so I have it set up right here with a mini PC. We are hooking up a Boss Game P3 Lite to this system, and it is hooked up to this external 13-inch 1080p OLED display. Now, the capture card itself is not hooked up to this Boss Game. It is hooked up to the Firebat A6. But all this setup has to do is essentially not have screen tearing like this one here, and it's already a huge plus. But if we can do 4K, if we can do 1440p high refresh rate and 1080p high refresh rate, then that's just a huge plus, because at this price point, it seems to be undercutting everything else on the market, especially the name brand stuff. And well, with the name brand stuff, you're always going to run into these copyright issues with devices that are restricted. But I am recording this right now on the Firebat A6, that is the capture system. So the capture card is hooked up to the Firebat A6, and then the Boss Game P3 Lite is essentially hooked up to the HDMI input of the capture card, and the HDMI output is going out into this 1080p 60 hertz OLED display. That's a very low resolution with a low frame rate, but this is just to see if we're going to get any kind of screen tearing or if there's going to be any kind of issues in general. I want to see just a baseline scenario, pretty much with the exact settings that I would use with the other capture card, that while it does bypass the copyright protection, quality wise it really is not the best. So taking a look at the footage after the fact, I'm really impressed by the quality here. This is so much better than that other capture card. Now, to be fair, the other capture card was just $25, but realistically isn't really all that usable unless you're in those scenarios where you have no other option to bypass the copyright protection. This, well, it bypasses that while also looking spectacular. This is comparable quality to the AverMedia capture card that I use. Pretty much I could use either one of those interchangeably and the results are going to be spectacular. But this is obviously the easiest test here, so let's try to make things a little bit harder for us here. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna try my Motorola phone. See, my Motorola phone has a built-in feature where if you plug it into a USB dock, it will essentially give you this interface that turns your phone into kind of a console media device. And what it'll let you do is essentially hook up the phone to a display and play your mobile games on your TV. And if you pair it with an Xbox controller, you essentially have a console here. It's an incredible feature that I've wanted to talk about for a very long time, but I haven't been able to because of the fact that I get this when I hook it up to my capture card. It essentially automatically enables the copyright protection from the get-go, and there's really nothing you can do to disable that. So while the pass-through image looks like this, the capture image is just going to be that that copyright warning, so it's unusable for this type of thing, and that's really disappointing to see, because if anything, if you're the type of person that plays a lot of mobile games and if you like to use a controller with them, this is one of the best ways to do it, and it would be a great way to capture footage for that. So this time I am going to hook it up to the capture card, and we're also going to switch things around. So the Firebat A6 is going to be hooked up to this 1440p external display that you see here. It's pretty massive. It's from UPerfect, and I'm hooking up the Firebat to it because of the fact that the HDMI out wasn't working to this display, trying to use it as the display for the phone, and I suspect that it has to do with the fact that the phone was trying to do 1440p 144 hertz, since that's the maximum that it supports. And it always seems like when I use an external display, it always sets it to the highest refresh rate that is supported, and technically, since the capture card can do a very high refresh rate, it just can't pass that through to the display. It was giving issues. So I'm switching it to where the capture card is now going to output to the 1440p display that originally the A6 was using. That goes to 1440p 144 hertz. So we're gonna also see if we can record at that setting. But just so you can see what I mean, here is this display that I'm going to be gaming on. It is 1440p 144 hertz, and here is where the A6 is displaying. As you can see, we are recording right now. And as you can see right here, we are recording Call of Duty Mobile being played on the Motorola Edge 2024. This is outputting at 1440p. That doesn't mean that's what the phone itself is rendering the game at, but the output itself is a 1440p signal. Of course, the game itself is going to be capped at 60. That's just what it runs at on this phone. There's only specific phones out there that will have up to 120 hertz enabled, and unfortunately, this isn't one of them. But as you can see here on OBS, it is showing the preview, it is recording, but in terms of the quality of the gameplay itself, it looks spectacular. Again, it is a very easy scenario. It is just 1080p 60. I imagine it's running at 1080p. I'm suspecting that it's pretty much running at whatever the resolution of the display of the phone itself is, but I'm not 100% sure. But either way, if you're a mobile gamer, this is actually a fantastic way to capture gameplay, because you're able to both use a controller and also play this on a far larger display. And this does also support ultra wide, by the way. I've used this on an ultra wide display and Call of Duty fully fills it up. But this does confirm that it bypasses the HDCP protection. So that means that any device that you want to use that has that copyright protection, you're going to be able to bypass without really having to do any kind of finicky workarounds. This just natively strips that away. And considering that it comes out cheaper than most capture cards that are going to have similar levels of performance, this is just an added bonus here. But now that I confirmed that the HDCP does get stripped, I did also want to push this thing further, since we had essentially just been sticking to that 1080p 60 range. So I hooked up the P3 Lite again, and I set it to 1440p at 144 hertz, so the full utilization of the display, and I set OBS and the capture card to essentially capture at 120 FPS for 1440p, which the device says is the maximum that it can do at 1440p. And look, this is the footage that I recorded at 120 frames per second. You can see it here playing back at 30 frames per second, which is how you do slow-mo essentially. You take that high FPS and you slow it down, and you can see that we are not missing really any frames here whatsoever. You will notice that there is screen tearing happening, and that is because we're getting an above 144 FPS in this title, which means that we're past the FreeSync range of this display. But capture-wise, you can really see that we are getting every single frame here. It's buttery smooth, and it is at 1440p. So what this tells you then is that you can do 4K, at least up to 4K 30 for capture. There is a way to do 4K 60 with it, but it involves using the MJPEG format, and I'm not a fan of doing that at all. So I would say, realistically speaking, you are capped out at 4K 30, which might be an issue for gameplay capture if that's something that really matters to you in terms of having that at least 60 FPS. But there are a lot of use cases where bypassing HDCP protection and being capped at 4K 30 are really not issues at all. So I definitely recommend checking out this capture card because it is punching so far above its weight. It's essentially matching the performance of capture cards that you will normally find between the $125 to $175 price range. Even some of these are getting up to the $200 price range, and they don't really perform any better than this. this. Of course, the fact that it can't do 4K 60 is a limiting factor, at least when it comes to a format that people are more accustomed to. So there is still a reason for going with that super high premium capture card that is past that $250 price range. But this has a feature that none of those will ever have, and that's being able to bypass that copyright protection. AverMedia, Elgato, and all of the popular capture card brands will never enable that as a feature because of the fact that they don't want to get sued. This coming from a generic Chinese company, they don't care about that kind of thing. And I don't know about you, but I'm more inclined to lean towards the Chinese company manufacturer than I would Elgato or AverMedia when it comes to their views on copyright protection. Everyone has their opinions on this kind of thing, but no one could ever really convince me to ever feel bad for mega corporations. So do what you want to do with your devices and your media. And if you're interested in a capture card that can do 4K 30, that can bypass copyright protection, check out the links down below. This is a better buy for sure than that $25 one, though that one is still insane value for money if you just need a capture card and you don't really care if there's going to be the screen tearing aspect to it. But I'll catch you guys in the next one.